Okay. Well, good morning. I'm happy to be here, actually. This is kind of my second meeting of the day. The first meeting was a board meeting for one of the nonprofits I serve on the board for. And I have to tell you, we were talking about liquidating the charity. And it's so timely because, frankly, we don't have a business plan for liquidation. And so now we've got these people saying, well, you could donate all the assets to here, which is an allowable use as you liquidate your $1.4 million in assets. And we as a board said, holy crap, I have no idea if we can even do this. Where are our lawyers? Very relevant to business planning. You know, my first exposure, I shared this with Andrea as we met a couple of weeks ago, my first exposure to business planning was my family owned a Coca-Cola bottle company. I'm fourth generation Coca-Cola. And so, it kind of went like this. When my dad was a refugee from General Electric. He was working in a little magnet plant in Edinburgh, Michigan. And that plant was bought by Hitachi. And my dad was, at the time, 40 years old. And the people at Hitachi said, we'd love to have you part of the organization, but you'll never go an inch higher. Okay, your career has... So my dad, being my dad, said, okay. So he answers an ad in the Wall Street Journal, which may be the only person I know who ever got a job out of answering the Wall Street Journal ad, for a general manager of a Coca-Cola plant in Cleveland. And so they interviewed him and talked, and they said, well, we really don't want to do this. But, because, he'd been out of the soft drink industry for 35 years. But we have a general manager in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, who's getting ready to retire. If you want to apprentice for a year, learn the business again, you can do that. Well, my dad did that. And at the end of the year, he went to the people and said, you know what, I don't want to be the general manager, I want to buy this place. And they said, okay. So my dad walked into Mellon Bank, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, sat down with the lender and said, I need to borrow $20 million. This is a man who has never earned more than $40,000 in his life. And I want to buy a Coca-Cola plant. And the lender looked at him and said, sounds like a good idea, let's do this. Literally in an afternoon. Fast forward, 1986, Christmas Eve. We've decided to get out of business. My dad says, we're sitting, I went and found a buyer. And so we're sitting at the same bank in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And my dad says to our banker, this is our buyer, and he wants to buy it, and we need to borrow, he needs to borrow $20 million plus. And the banker said, we need to see your business plan. The buyer looks at my dad, and my dad says, my son is in the process of updating our business plan. As we speak, you'll have it in 2 weeks. Never done one in my life. Never done one in my life. I was like, holy crap, thanks, Dad. And so there I go, and there was no internet. So I couldn't Google it. And I couldn't steal one from somebody. So I found this little book, and I went to putting it together. And I have to tell you, it was so eye-opening. Because if we had had that business plan to operate our business, we would not have hired tons of sales managers who didn't have the same philosophy for running a business as we had. We would have had all of our people facing in the same direction because they could read it and see what our strategy was. We were a weird bottling company. And I say weird because we had the highest wholesale prices in the nation. And we had 76% market share. So Coca-Cola hated us. Why? Because when they wanted to run 99-cent 2-liter bottles at Safeway in a national promotion, we didn't play. And so, because we were making money. And so anyway, so there was my introduction to business planning. And I have to tell you that I have become, as some Al will probably tell you, I'm almost evangelical about the importance of business planning. Now, how many of you have a strategic plan for your operation? Yeah, most of us. And when we talk about nonprofits, generally we think about strategic plans. This is our vision for the next 3 to 5 years. This is our mission. We want to talk about our current situation, and here are our goals and objectives in a broad sense. That's kind of our strategic plan. We talk about our values, or our core values, if you will. And we talk about, our programmatic planning, and how are we going to get resources, and who, but it's all fairly generic. What's rarer is a nonprofit having a business plan, where the boots hit the ground, where we talk about everything from the mission, to the need, to the how are we going to operationalize this, to how do we know if we're doing what we plan to do. And so today what I want to do is talk you through kind of the process that we use at the Small Business Development Center and as our state-wide network. One of the things that I don't want you to do is write a plan because somebody told you you needed a plan. Okay? I want you to write a plan so you can use it as your operating value. I want you to write a plan so that we fill in some of the holes, but you write a plan so that when I come to you and I say, I'm very interested in your agency, I need to know more, you've got it, you can put it out right now. You can share that with. And I think, Andrea, correct me if I'm wrong, my business plan is on will be on your flash drive. And I have no problem sharing that with you. It is long. You'll see key questions in blue, and that's how we write our plans every year. We always do 3 years worth. But it became important for me as we have, as an agency, changed our strategy. For those who have used us historically, know that we do a lot with startups, have historically done a lot with startups. We've done a lot of one-on-one consulting and a lot of training. Okay? We changed our strategy a little bit to minimize the resources we put to startups and maximize the resources we put to other segments, and I'll show you those segments here later. And to do that required that everybody in my shop understand what we were going toward and understand what their role was. And so my business plan is a communication tool for my staff, for our accrediting organizations, and for the general public. Okay? I actually got my dean to read it, and he went, "That's what you do?" So, after 15 years, it's kind of nice to know that your boss finally figured out what you do. So let's launch into this. This business plan, think of it as a story. Don't think of it as a business plan. Think of it as a story. You're writing the story of your organization, and it is basically that roadmap. If you think of MapQuest, right, left, quarter mile, half a mile, it tells you exactly how to get there. And so it tells everybody where you're going and how you're going to get there, how you plan to get there. I think that it's important that you let your plan evolve, and that's going to be part of the measurement that we do, is we're going to react in real time to changes in the marketplace, to, if we figure out we made a bad assumption, we can change. Okay? So let's launch into the plan. And the purpose of the plan is for internal and external use. It tells me why you exist. It builds that case that here is the need. It says this is what I want to achieve. Okay? And then it lays out before me, before your employees, before your colleagues, before your funding agencies, this is our strategy, and these are the tactics. I'm going to use the word methods later, that we will employ to reach our goals. And then, oh, by the way, here's the milestone, so that if we're off track, we can catch it early instead of at the end of the funding year when they come to us and say, well, what did you achieve? We go, oh, shoot, didn't do it. Okay, we'll know in real time. And then it helps you, and I really need this, it helps you to define your mission and goal. Okay, and to me, and I'll speak to mission a lot more, that's a critical filter. Because as nonprofits, we're guilty of chasing money and adding programs because the money is there, as opposed to adding programs that fit our mission. And we've done it. We have chased money for things that frankly, we didn't need to be involved because we didn't hold true to our mission. So, let's launch. This is what we're going to kind of do today. I'll talk to you about little bites of the business plan. This is a little different than the way I usually present business planning to a for-profit entity, but I have to tell you that you are a for-profit entity. Just that instead of building your bottom line through the year, we all work our bottom line to zero in whatever funding year we're in. Okay? But everything else, you do pretty much the same. Okay? And so when I open a business plan, the first thing I see is that executive summary. I think it is possibly the most important portion of any business plan. Because in many cases, it's the only part of your plan that's going to get read. It's 1 or 2 pages long. It is a standalone document. And when I say that, it is the Reader's Digest version of your entire business plan. And so when Andrea said you write it last, that's going to save you work. Because what you do is you write this plan, you get happy with it, then you employ the old cut and paste. And we pull the key nuggets from the whole body of the plan into the business plan, into the executive summary, so that when I'm reading it, I have the full flavor of what your big document is. And if it's well crafted, you're going to make me want to read the big document. If it's poorly crafted, and I have to tell you this, I read, it's probably in excess of 100 business plans a year for various organizations. If I can't get through that executive summary, even though they pay me to do it, I have no motivation to read the body. So it needs to be something that we work really hard on, that we really love. And I will tell you this from a funder standpoint. Andrea says, hey, sit on my education funding. Okay, there's only 20 agencies, times 22 to 24 pages of application. My brain's not that good. So I start reading, I get a flavor of it, and if I really like it, oh boy, I'm in it. If I don't like it, and I don't mean that I give it a short shift, it's just, that's the nature of us. You know, and I do a lot of lending. I'm on a couple of lending boards, and you know what? We don't see your whole business plan. What they give me is your executive summary. So either that lender or people that you're borrowing from are going to have to reword your business plan and give it to the people who are making the decision. And then use your words. And frankly, I'd a whole lot rather have my words representing my organization than somebody's interpretation of my words. So that's why that thing is so, so important. And frankly, if they don't get it by the executive summary, they'll never get it. It just won't. Wow. I don't know I did that. I don't know how that is in there. Okay, so a mission statement. I'm not a great big mission statement guy in terms of, it's not on my business card or anything like that. But I think it is an important thing for you to have in your brain to be able to brand for your board, for your advisors, for your constituents, for your stakeholders. And so basically what it does is it says, here's the end game. Here is the problem or the opportunity that we're seeking to address. It says, how are we going to do it? And then it says, who are the targets? And so it doesn't, we're down to 2 or 3 sentences. Some organizations, and that's not wrong, but they have these big, long mission statements. And it goes in a big philosophical trip over hill and dale. Can you remember? Nah. You want to be able to use it, to operationalize it, to use it, again, as I say, filter. My son, who's now 25, and a father, when he was growing up, he was 88. Okay? So here's the deal. He's like a lot of us. If you put him in the outfield, okay, in playing baseball, it's like, hey mom, oh, a butterfly, kitten, grab the bat. He's lost, chasing opportunities, and a lot of us are like that, right? Because we chase these opportunities because we need to grow our program, we need resources. What happened was when I put him behind the plate as a catcher, the boy developed laser focus because he was fully engaged all the time. And it's like your mission statement, because what that does is, okay, here's the filter. Okay, that doesn't fit our mission. Don't distract me. That doesn't fit my mission. Don't distract me. Look, that's perfect. And so it causes you to keep that focus on the things that are near and important to you. Okay. Okay, so when you're thinking about crafting it, I want to talk about the purpose behind where you are. It's that reference, as I've said, that you, your board, your staff can all keep it in sight so we don't go wandering off. And it's really the starting place for your business model, because we're going to take that mission, and the next thing we're going to do, and here's two different missions. That the top one is my statewide network mission. Okay, the Florida network delivers with certified professionals. Okay, that's the who and the how. Consulting, training, and information. That's the what. To help businesses succeed. That's the end game. Okay, and create positive impact for our economy. Provide value to our stakeholders. Okay, so basically, we're addressing each of those three components that I've said. Here's another one. The New Way of Life Re-Entry Project helps women and girls break the cycle of entrapment in the criminal justice system. Outcome, healthy and satisfying lives. Okay. So, let's launch into the plan. And to me, like any story, your business plan has to start with some history. It is kind of where did we come from? My network was founded in 1975. So in the intervening 28 or 38 years, we've provided consulting to thousands. We are a statewide network. We are based at universities and colleges. So there's an educational component. We want to talk about what's the key, what holds us together. If you're an independent agency, who are you affiliated with? Who are you funded by? Have you received funding for a long time or a short time? Are you a United Way agency, an aspiring United Way agency? Are you part of a national group of organizations with a national brand, or are you a local brand? We want to know those things. We want to talk about, hey, what's going on in our world? Our world is changing. Greg is in a world that is strange, because you've got these odd characters like FEMA, and then you've got a whole new cast of characters at the state emergency management thing, and they're all trying to figure out where their offices are, much less what their programs are. And they've got money, and they tell you they got money, but they don't want to spend it on things. So it's kind of like, okay, well, that's what's happening in our industry. And we have a disaster response program. Greg's got a disaster response program. In fact, he's going to talk to you about the COOP. He's going to talk to you about prepared communities, hardened communities. There's a lot of emphasis on this. But then there's a lot of people right now, my constituents, the business community, they don't show up unless there's something going on in development. So I can preach planning. Greg is planning until his face is blue. But unless there's something swirling, we don't get anybody's attention. That's an important thing going on in our industry. Corporate giving is changing. The nature of corporate giving is changing. Who gives and what they give and under what conditions they give is changing. You need to talk about what's happening in your world. In my world, if I were working on my business plan today, I would have to learn to spell sequestration, because I'm going to lose $25,000 to $50,000 in funding from my federal sources due to sequestration. Okay, and so that's an issue. How do we plan for that? Who gets axed? Actually, does anybody get axed? Or do I cut rent? Or do I cut equipment? Or do I not invest in professional development? What's happening in our industry and how does it affect? That goes right into your plan. Okay? We want to talk about what are our strategic priorities, and you'll see in a minute. I have 6 strategic priorities that we use as a network. It came right out of our strategic plan. This business plan is an absolute, it flows straight out of our strategic plan. What we've done is we've aligned funding with our strategic priorities. So that crystallizes for me as somebody running an organization, and for my people, what's important and what's not. Because we're all good people. And by virtue of the fact that we probably all work in nonprofits, we generally want to do anything we can do to help. And so people ask us to do unnatural acts, and we do them. Because, who wants to disappoint a client or a customer or a constituent? But are they always important? And can we learn to say no? This is, I'm talking to me now. All right, so here are my strategic priorities. Enhance leadership and effectiveness and program performance by providing the right products and services. Again, means I have to know what my customers want, right? It's not based on me, it's my customer. Build awareness. Hey, I can't tell you how many people say to me, we've been doing what we do for 38 years. I wish I'd have known you were here. I wish I'd have known. How come nobody knows about you? We've consulted with approximately 30,000 people, but nobody knows about us. Products and services that help businesses, again, strengthen our image statewide, provide for excellent work and employee learning. Those are our strategic priorities. State them if you got them. Again, that tells everybody who's reading it what's important to you. I really believe that this may be the next most important thing in the executive summary, and that is what's going on in your marketplace. Who is your customer, your constituent, your stakeholder, your beneficiary? Because you know what? At the end of the day, the people that we serve only care about what's in it for me. And it's just like in a retail environment, it's just like when you go to the spa or the salon or whatever. We buy it because we want to solve a problem for us. A problem meaning something that we don't want to be is. Okay? So it applies to the people who fund you, it applies to your board, it applies to the clients you serve. Okay? It may apply to government if they fund you. But we need to know who is it, describe them. I mean really describe them demographically. That's the numbers and the statistics, male, female, their age group, their economic status, their race, their gender, all of that. We want to be able to say, this is my number one customer. And then we also want to talk about the psychographic side. That's the activities and the interests and the opinions. So maybe the people that you're serving, we can define a little bit in terms of what they do, what their politics are. Maybe what is it that we can use to figure out if those are my best customers. Okay? And I'll give you some examples here in a minute. We need to know for certain what is it they want. Notice I didn't necessarily say need. But to me, the two are irrelevant. The want is just a learned way to solve a need. Right? So I'm thirsty, I want a Diet Coke. Well, that Diet Coke is the way I learn to satisfy my thirst, as opposed to a bottle of water. Okay, or whiskey. Is there a demonstrated need? A lot of the nonprofits that I've been a part of have been accused of not having that clear focus on need. And so they chase imaginary needs to justify their existence. And, so then you end up with kind of this dysfunctional, really high cost per client served because there really isn't that need. And you have to really figure out what do these people really need so that I can build products and services that satisfy them. Okay, so I think that here's where I want to hear from you if I'm reading your business plan. This is my client base. There are this many of those people out there. And then national organizations can help you with those kind of statistics. Lord knows the internet is full of that kind of statistic. But if we haven't got that demonstrated need, it's just like when I'm selling something. Okay? Why would I have a product on my shelf that nobody wants? I want to have products on my shelf that I'm going to move, that I'm going to turn fast and make a profit. And that's the other thing, is we need to know that there's a demonstrated need and that we can serve it in a way that is financially appropriate, feasible. Okay? And then I would encourage you, write in your business plan to do a SWOT analysis. Strengths of your organization, weaknesses of your organization, what are the opportunities out there, and what are the threats? So it's a thorough examination, really, of us as an organization. For me, one of my strengths as an organization is our reputation. And it's also the caliber of people I have on my staff. One of the weaknesses of my organization is the dependence on federal funds. Okay, so one of the things I've addressed in my business plan is the need to diversify our funding sources. Okay, opportunities out there, again, filter them through your mission, because there's lots of opportunities. And I tell this to companies all the time. There are tons of cool ideas out there, but there are many fewer opportunities. There are a lot of really cool ideas that you'll never make a buck. Okay? And then what are the threats? Threats include things like, hey, I'm really the only manager in the agency. If I drop dead tomorrow, I don't know what my folks will do. Or if you've got key personnel that you haven't documented procedures. God, if my assistant Kilty ever leaves my organization, I'm retired. Because she does everything. And I can't hire another everything person because I don't even know all the things she does. So that's a threat. Another threat is that 2 years ago, I forget what happened, but United Way Giving in Santa Rosa County, we fell off the tape in terms of giving. So we literally had to take people from $25,000 and $30,000 annual funding levels to 9, 8, 7. Most of us couldn't take that hit necessarily. And so we need to think about, what are the threats out there and how do we build our infrastructure, our procedures to answer that? Keep an eye on the time.
I'm watching.
All right. I just don't read hand signals real well. And so I think a key component of this, you know what? Nobody will fault you for saying you have 30 weaknesses. In fact, I'm going to respect you for recognizing that there are forces out there that don't work in your favor. Because then you're going to plan contingencies for it. And that's a big part of the value for you. And Greg will say this. If you already plan your continuity, it's a whole lot easier once the storm clears, rather than let's make it up as we go. When we responded to Katrina in New Orleans, I have to tell you, there were people who walked in first day. They had their tub, they had their hard drives, they had all their stuff, and they were on the way to recovery like that. Okay? Literally, I had a veterinarian walk in New Orleans. He said, I need to set up practice pads. Do you know a building in Pensacola? And he picked his tubs up. He drove to Pensacola, leased the building, and he was in business 3 days later because he had his boot together. As opposed to the many who were like, holy crap, it all went down the river. Now what? And I can't reach anybody because the cell towers stink, and I don't know how to get stuff to sell if I could reach somebody. Okay, so that's a threat. We live on the Gulf Coast. That's an automatic threat. Right? All right. From the mission, I need you to tell me what are the needs. So we're going to flow from our mission and develop our needs statement. And that needs statement describes the situation that we're facing in our community or in our organization and how we're going to address it. So I need to know if, there are 5,000 people who are in need of my service, or 50. I need to know statistically, where are they? Are they in certain census tracts? Are they in certain zip codes? Are they scattered about? And that's the quantitative stuff, the stuff that we can prove that comes out of statistics. And then there's the qualitative stuff. This is the anecdotal. It's okay to put in your business plan. In fact, it's appropriate. Copies of articles, journals, testimonials, tell somebody's story. The thing that we do is we just assume frequently everybody understands what the need is. I don't have to prove it. You know? And it's not always the case. So here's a need statement. This is what justifies my existence. Small Business Administration says 80% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years of operation. They go on to say that 80% of those that survive 5 years fail in the next 10. In the next 5. So 80%, so that's 96%. Now, the way they categorize failure, perhaps not like you and I would, so that when my friends merged their company with another and each put $50 million in their pocket as it went public, Small Business Administration would call that failure. I'm not going to sneeze at 50 million. But that's an example of a need statement. If I, and I don't have a statistic, I can make it up, let's say, I think I saw this on TV, 60% of African American males exiting the criminal justice system will be back in prison in 3 years. I think I saw that on TV. That's a needs statement. So that allows us to say, this is why we're developing programs that affect recidivism, whatever that word is. Okay? You're all nonprofits. Look around. Who are your competitors? You have them. Not that you would necessarily compete for clients, but I bet you're competing for dollars. Because, I got 20 people wanting education money for the United States. And I've got to make decisions as a committee. But more than that, there are people who do things that are similar to you. And we need to know kind of what do they do really well. So I'm a huge scrapbook guy. Not scrapbooking, but I keep competitor files. I did it when I was in the private industry, I do it publicly. So I collect, for instance, in my case, I collect every piece of paper I can find on an organization called Grow Florida. They do similar, but not the same things. But we compete for legislative dollars. Okay? And so, one of the things you ought to think about is kind of looking at what do other agencies do? Collect their promotional materials, look at who their board is, look at if something's written up about them, clip it out of the paper or scan it into your hard drive or whatever way you collect things, and just keep it on file. I tell everybody in business, this is going to sound really unsavory, read the DUIs. Because, you would never use it publicly, but if you've ever had a DUI, it is an extremely distracting and high involvement process. So you'll know something about competitors, whether or not they're distracted at the time, or whether or not, it changes the nature of your business. It's just one of those things. What I say is know as much as you can about everybody, especially those people that you do similar. Shop them. Hey, call them up. How do I access service? I tell people if you're in retail, go shop your competitors. Look at the shelves. Are they full or are they just fronted? How's the lighting? Is the person at the checkout counter helpful and enthusiastic, or is it the 16-year-old who's there because they have to be somewhere? A lot of our agencies do that. And so we need to think about, call them up, see it. And then you know what? If you find something they do really well, steal it. Why not? I'm a big proponent that there's really not many original thoughts left. So it's how we re-engineer. I've seen organizations with, I call my person at the front desk the receptionist. My colleagues at the University of North Florida, she is the manager of first impressions. It works for her. It's a little hokey for me. But you know what? If that works, why not adapt? Anybody ever work in the restaurant industry? Ever heard of the Outback meal? Outback meal. Outback Steakhouse. You're in my restaurant, your steak is rare, you ordered it well done, and you ask to see a manager. Now, as a manager, I can either come up to you and say, "Is there a problem?" It's a little intimidating, isn't it? Or I can do what Outback does. I look down, and I look you eye to eye, and we talk. Now, Outback screwed up. Let me tell you, initially they had the manager put his hand on the customer's arm. But the meal works. And it's taught in almost every major chain restaurant management school. And it's just referred to in the industry as the Outback meal. That is a best practice that is so easy to adapt. So my lesson there is, don't be afraid to reverse engineer. Figure out how they do it, and then figure out how it works in your organization. The other thing is, we get so hung up in our day-to-day that we forget that there are other people who do similar things, perhaps complementary things to what we do, and there's power in partnership. And there's no reason that if the right opportunity came along, whether it's funding, whether it's program development, that you can't grab somebody else's hand and say, "Let's do this together this one time." Okay? And that's what we call strategic alliances. And I tell this story all the time. Strategic alliance. My father-in-law, when he was alive, was a roofer, and he did roofing, and he slate roofs and copper gutters. He was talented. Every day, he and all his buddies had coffee at the Spud Nut. Okay, and what they did was they would exchange leads. So his buddy Jimmy, who did flooring, didn't do roofs. So somebody would come to Jimmy and say, "You did great for my floor. Can you do my slate roof?" He'd say, "No, but my buddy Clyde will do it." And so they're all at the Spud Nut one day, and my mother-in-law would say they're just telling lies. My father-in-law said they're exchanging information. The University of Virginia was getting ready to build a college of engineering. And one of these guys said, "We can do this." These are all single guys in a pickup truck, maybe a helper. And they went together, 13 of them, to put together a bid to build a college of engineering at the University of Virginia. And they got it. It was the only big project they ever did, but it was 13 guys who worked out of their pickup truck and maybe had a used store. And they formed a strategic alliance for that one opportunity. So they looked a lot bigger than a bunch of guys at the Spud Nut. The Spud Nut is a potato donut. All right, next section of your plan, we want to talk about what is it you're selling. Don't be afraid of that word sell. It's products, it's services, it's what we do. Okay? We want to talk about what are you really selling. Most of us want to talk about features. What we provide, or who provides it in our organization. We provide counseling. We provide food assistance. Okay? What I want you to do here is step back and look at it from the customer's point of view. There are a lot of lessons from Maslow that we can learn. We provide a safe environment for after school. That Maslow and safety was one of the base. It was actually physiological. Okay, so some of us answer the physiological, some of us answer the safety. Some of us answer the socialization part, the belonging part. Okay? And it could be because they're affiliated with us. It could be because they're socialized with people like themselves. Maybe it's to help people get to what they aspire, to be part of the social group that they aspire to. Independence for the disabled is an important Maslow kind of need. But what I'm trying to get you to do is think about this from the customer standpoint. We've all heard of Revlon, right? So Peter Refson said, "We don't sell cosmetics, we sell hope." Think about that. I mean, that's an interesting perspective in terms of how do we appeal to our constituents, to our funders, in terms of what are the needs that we're satisfying for our clients. You know, so I went physiological, I went safety, I went belongingness, then there's what? Self, right? How others view us and what we aspire to, how we see ourselves. Okay, so a lot of people, a lot of our programs change the way people think about themselves, change in terms of self-esteem, change in terms of self-sufficiency, change in terms of rewarding ourselves. Okay, whereas the belongingness allows us to care for our families better, allows us to move in a different, perhaps, social circle. This one's for me. Okay? And for your constituents, these may be, you may have to use different messages for different constituents. And then at the top one was self-actualization. Hey, that's our donors. It's the people who volunteer in our organization who give back. Okay? And we've got to have messages that address those things appropriate to our products and services. And then we have to communicate them to the right market segments at the right time. Okay, that's all I do if I'm selling retail, if I'm selling Coca-Cola, is I'm crafting messages for you as a specific market segment, and I'm communicating to you in a way that's relevant to you at the time to get you to use my product and service. Okay? So, you know, frankly, Safeway never really cares about how much Coca-Cola they sell. They care about how much volume they move and how many dollars go in the till. So when I'm talking to Safeway, I'm talking return on investment, I'm talking profitability. I'm not talking about displays. Because they don't want displays. So we want to talk about the benefits that our services provide as opposed to the physical nature or the philosophical nature of those services we provide. And, you know, you'll see in the handout, what we've done is we've said, here are our key market segments. Pre-ventures, startup, micro business and SME, small and medium-sized enterprise. And then we said, all right, so we've got those are our key segments, and then we're going to develop products that are appropriate for each of those segments. And so what we want to talk about is, you know, what have we done? What would we add if we had? There are markets that we may enter. There are markets we may exit. You know, we actually, because we had a cut of funding, had to take international trade consulting off of our array of services because I couldn't afford to buy who had the expertise. And I'm not going to have a service listed that I can't provide at high quality. So we exited that market. So now we found somebody in our state system who will handle it. Okay, so it's important as you're telling this story to tell me the things that you're doing, that you plan on leaving behind, or because of funding have to leave behind, or that you want to add. You know, we're going through a process right now. I was telling Andrea, I've got a $7 million funding bill in Tallahassee. And it's a mess. But if we were somehow going to get that money, what we promised the legislature is, we're having to plan, what are the activities that we would implement to justify getting the money? Because there is no appetite for more of the same. So now we've said, okay, we take half of the money, and statewide we're going to implement best practices, and here are those best practices. The other half of the money we're going to use to fund innovative, basically, experiments. So we've justified to the legislature, and I've had to build into my business planning process kind of what if I got a windfall? And I've also built into the process. If sequestration happens, and I go back to 2008 levels less 10%, which is what they're talking about, what am I going to do? Well, in my case, I'm going to shut physical locations so that I can keep payroll. I can work people virtually. I don't need to pay rent. Okay? And I'll forego a storefront to keep people employed and keep providing services. Okay? That's part of our business planning model. You know, and there's a funding cut for any of us is just as devastating as a hurricane, you know, because it threatens the perpetuation of our entity. So I want you to talk about, in this section, as you're writing it, this is the great stuff we do. This is what our clients get out of it. And some of it is very altruistic, and some of it is very quantifiable. And we want to talk about both. So here are our segments. And what we've done is we've said, if you look at it, pre-venture, startup, micro, SMBs. When I talked about the change in strategy that we're undergoing, this is a reflection of that. Okay? Because we had historically almost 35% of our service, our resources, our hours of consulting, that's my scarce resource, went to pre-venture. So 65% went to pre-venture and startup, 35%. And this is statewide, my numbers are a lot different. So we said we want to reallocate our resources over time, because we can't do it tomorrow, so that, and in 2013 and 2014, by the time 2014 hits, 75% of my scarce resources will go to the micro businesses and the small and medium enterprises. Strategically, we made that decision because those are the ones who are most likely to generate economic impact. Bigger loans, more hiring. And so this is part of our business plan, is to transition the way we provide services to the business community. And what we did was, hopefully your handouts are clear, is we said, okay, there are segments across the top. What are the core services we provide to each group? So obviously, if they're a medium-sized business, which we define as 3 years, older than 3 years, we define it as having 10 employees, $1 million in sales. They don't need startup assistance. What they need is financing assistance, they need strategic planning assistance, they often need marketing assistance. And so what we've been able to do is to say, here are our key segments, and here are the products we're going to supply to each. And yes, there's overlap. But I think it's really important, and that kind of at a glance is really, I deal with bankers, and they just gotta draw a picture, because they just don't get it. And so, if I can draw a picture for you, I think you can comprehend it. For our board, okay, the board that I was meeting this morning, I've been on that board for 4 years. I had no idea we provided 17 individual services that some are real money losers. And as we contemplate shutting down the enterprise, the question is, which ones need to survive? And which ones will go unnoticed if we take them away? Unfortunately, we're doing this at the back end. Probably 4 or 5 years ago, if we built it into our plan, we wouldn't be offering 17 individual services. We'd have a core of 6 or 7, and we probably would be profitable. But that horse is out of the barn. So this helps us kind of, if that were a 50-line chart, then we got to do some cutting. We've got to figure, because what happens is you try to do everything for everybody, and you end up doing nothing for anybody. So this allows you to kind of keep, again, a focus, driven right out of your mission, driven right out of your need state, of what is it that we are providing, what are the benefits at the back end. You're going to get a whole day, I think, on marketing. So I'm just going to touch on it. But in your business plan, one of the things, and it's in my business plan, is how are people going to find out about this? How will people, the right people, know about this? And one of the things that I do is I do 200 public speaking engagements a year. Greg probably does twice. Because we got to tell our story. I'm not allowed to spend federal money on advertising. So I have to find other ways to tell the story. And so I engage in a whole lot of public relations, a whole lot of board activity, community involvement, a whole lot of, I can tell you, every Rotary Club from here to Tallahassee, Kiwanis Club. We get a lot of referrals from banks. We cultivate referrals. Cultivate referrals from other agencies. Word of mouth is critical. Don't overlook your boards. Boards are great vehicles for communication. I ran the Pensacola Chamber's business incubator for about 14 months. And one of the things I did, because I do 200 engagements a year, I can't do more. So I said to my board, here's a PowerPoint and a script. You're going to go and you guys need to go and do the Milton Rotary while I'm doing the West Side, the West Rotary. You guys need to talk to your boards about our incubator. It's 4 or 5 slides, it's quick. If you're doing a Gulf Power presentation, slip it in. I'm doing an SPDC presentation, slip it in. And that's how that was part of our communication plan. Part of your communication plan is kind of you all have websites, you all have, I'm sure, brochures, you all have mailings, you have mailing lists, constant contact. I've got 8,000 names on my constant contact list, so that when we're doing a workshop, bam, hit it, go. You know, there's somebody in my organization who's good and quick and fast, but we really need to discuss how are we going to tell our story, both from how do we get our clients to us so they understand what we can and can't do, so they understand when and where it's appropriate to come see us, but also our funders. To me, when you use the word position, it's where you fit in people's brain. You know, the only way I can explain positioning to you is think of the soap aisle. You kind of go down the soap aisle in the grocery store. You're going to get the Fells Naphtha and the Lava soap. Then move a little farther and there's Ivory. You move a little farther and there's like the Lever 3000. And then down the aisle you're going to finally get to like the Combs and the Doves and the oily, greasy, girly stuff. And each one of those has a place in your brain. Because when I'm working on my car or working on my lawnmower and I go in the house, I'm not reaching for the Dove. I'm reaching for the Lava or the Gojo or whatever it is. Positioning is, where are you in a person's mind when they have a need? How have we told our story in such a way that I know it's appropriate to come to your shop at the Global Corner when this happens? But no, I really, it's not fair to compare Global Corner and Humane Society, but, well, maybe it is. If I'm having to get rid of a pet, I'm not going to Global Corner. I know the Humane Society will take good care of it. And so we teach people. We do it with pain relievers, we do it with toothpaste, we do it with computers. When is it appropriate to use a product and when is it not? You know, what we're trying to teach our segments is, if you're a startup, then you want to be accessing my workshops and my online assistance. If you're an existing business with a business plan, or with at least the beginning of a business plan, then yeah, we want you to access our consulting resources. And we're trying to teach our constituencies what's the appropriate doorway in my agency for a given set of needs. And that's position. Is there something unique about you? We call that a unique selling proposition. In other words, you ought to have kind of this is what I do better than anyone. This is what we do extremely and extraordinarily well, and crafted almost as in the slogan. That'll help you in so many, whether it's at cocktails or whether it's when you're sitting before the funding panel and I say to you, so what's different about you? And I will ask you that. And you will say, you know what, this is what's different about me. We do this for them better than anybody in the whole planet. Or we are the most efficient at what we do from a cost standpoint. And I think that's one of the, again, unique selling proposition. Not from your eyes, customer's eyes, funder's eyes. All right, next section. This is how we do it. This is my operating plan. This is who does what from a management standpoint. Who are my key personnel? You know what? I'm a manager. That's what I do. I administer. I keep bad guys away from the door. You know, I do all the stuff that allows the work to get done so that the people who are really talented in my organization can do the work. Think about it. I do the noxious stuff. I go walk around the halls at the House of Representatives in Tallahassee. I have to do the investor relations part of it. I do the 200 public speaking things to make sure we have a constant flow of clients. I negotiate the contracts with the SBA, and I do the match raising. Okay? That's all the stuff that I do that has nothing to do with the productivity of my center. But by doing all that, my consultants only have to focus on consulting. So the key personnel are kind of we couldn't do it without you. You know, it's like if you're running a restaurant, that chef is key personnel, even though they're not the owner. If you lost them in their recipes, we'd be sunk. Okay, so that's kind of the same thing in your organization. If we want to talk about organizational structure, mine is very flat. Me, everybody. But in many of your programs, there's a lot of steps. We can talk about the structure and the authority between the structures. Because I, as a funder, one of the things I'm really, obsessive about, checks and balances. I want to know that money's being taken care of well. And most of us are very small agencies, so separation of powers is very difficult. So the question is, how do we account for that? You know, we want to talk about a human, and I always tell people, throw in an organizational chart. Maybe the first time you ever created one. Well, we want to know who interacts with each other, but also who reports to whom. And most of us, because we're small, everybody reports to one person. But in the case that it's not, you know, we need to draw that picture again. And have a human resource plan. You know, that's not just for big folks. But how do we know when to bring somebody on and let somebody off? You know, the reality in my world is that because I'm based at the university, we have a very expensive employee benefits burden. So we've had to resort to hiring a lot of people OPS, contract labor, so that we don't have the benefit burden. That has been a challenge. Why? Because people want the benefits. So it's affected the kind of candidates we can hire, and it's affected the nature of the work they do. Okay? And so we've done some things like, for my contract labor, even though they traditionally have been hourly employees, well, you know, we get an excessive amount of leave at the university and the state system. So what I've done is I've said, you know what, I'm just going to pay you this much a week. That way when we're off over Christmas, or we're off for President's Day, or we're off for Martin Luther King, you don't get punished for us getting a day off. Okay? And so that's an accommodation. That's part of my human resource plan. Part of my human resource plan is everybody sits down with me quarterly and we evaluate their performance, their productivity against goal and expectation. I mean, we sit down a whole lot more than that, but it's formalized in the organization. Everybody understands 4 times a year, not once a year. We do one of these big jolly evaluations and we all shake hands and sing Kumbaya. Quarterly, accountability. You want to discuss in your operation, what's the role of governance? I've been on boards that didn't understand that governance didn't mean access to individual employees. You know, on the same token, I've been on boards where we were so far in the clouds that I didn't know people's names in the organization. How do you want it to be? How do you expect it to be? I've been on boards where they expect us to be daily participants. You know, by a board member, you're a volunteer. And what that means is I need 3 hours or 4 hours. Or it means, you know what, 100% investment. In other words, if you're going to be a board member, you're going to pay. And that's a decision that you make. You know, and I don't know what Andrea's philosophy is on that. Because I've been on boards where we've had some real rock star names. You're going to say, you know, you're a great guy, we love your reputation. Check. You know, and you know, and they've given $1 million to the university, where they've given. So that's your decision. You know, but we want to talk about the role of governance in your organization. We want to talk about the kind of information that you share with them and the feedback you get from them. I have an advisory board that meets 4 times a year. Sometimes we don't meet. I won't bring them in if I don't have something for them to do. But if I need them to go and march in Tallahassee or go raise money for me or get me in a door, then I access them. And they understand that. That's just a philosophic way that we work. Production. Most of us can tell me what it costs to provide a unit of production. Our statewide goal at the SPC is that we strive to have our cost per hour of consulting fully burdened under $100. That's a high number. My number is 50. Actually, it's 47. So I understand, and that counts all the rent I pay, the administration. I mean, that's fully loaded. But we're tracking what the cost of production is, and what the cost of production is against peers, how much production against other states, because we're a really good value at UWF. My people will say it's because I pay slave wages, but that's not necessarily the case. You know, we have. One of the things, when I first moved here, this is really kind of fun. We were what I would consider a typical nonprofit. It's kind of like, hey, we do really good work, don't we? I assure you we're doing good stuff. And that was kind of what I walked into. So then I gave my folks a deal. They didn't see it as a deal. I said, I'll tell you what, for every 10 hours you're on the clock, I want 7 hours of productivity. You'd have thought I had asked them to kill babies. I got grieved. But what I said was this. 7 out of 10. Here's what I know. I know that from time to time I'm going to drag you into the staff meeting. That's not productive. I know that you're allowed this much vacation by the university. I'm going to subtract that out. I know that I have to provide you with professional development. I know that clients are going to no-show. So what I'm saying is, for every 40, let's try to get, 32 hours of productivity. Once I do that, then I know when I go to a funding agency, and my funding agency, which has a different philosophy than I do, they want head count. Okay, and they say to me, Larry, I want you to provide 10,000 hours of consulting. I can say safely to them, I have this much resources. There is no physical way that we can provide any more than 2,800 hours of consulting unless you increase our funding. And so what you've done is you've said, this is my productivity planning. This is how I tell people, if you give me another this much money, I can add this many more hours of service to a key constituent. Otherwise, we all tend to overpromise. Oh, heck yeah, it's more money. We'll find a way, because we always have. And it's a great argument to say, yep, this is what I can do for that amount of resources. Okay. We also need to have built into this operational, how do we know that we're being successful for our clients? What is our customer service, whatever that means to you, plan? How do we monitor it? One of my goals every year is to exceed 94% excellent or very good rating from our clients. And I've got 2 ways of doing that. One, we survey them. The other is, a third proxy is, would you refer us to a friend or family member? And if I don't get 94%, I've got to work on where am I falling short. Okay, and that's a personal goal. Our network goal is 90%. But our local goal is 94%. Talk about facilities. Some of us have them, some of us don't. They have the bane of my existence. I hate paying rent. That's a body I could have had. But roofs leak, internet goes down, all of the things that we all deal with day to day. Talk about facilities. Do you need specialized equipment? Because many of us do. Do you need, how do we allocate our resources? That's the other question is, do we have a systematic plan that says, this is how we're going to put our resources out there? Do you need me to break? All right, let me see where I am. Perfect time to break. Yes, we'll come back, we'll talk budgets, a lot of excitement about budget. Because we don't like numbers. You know what? I hate them too. But they tell the story for us. And so, for me, okay, when I write a business plan, I write all the words, and then as I'm telling you all the things I'm going to do, I can turn that into numbers because I know my people and I know my costs and I have a CPA on my staff. He does the numbers first, and then he writes the story based on what the numbers are. So there's no beginning or end necessary that's right or wrong. But what I want you to think about as you're building budgets is what are the activities, the methods that we're going to undertake, and what does each one of those cost? And so that's the easiest way to build a budget. Now, for some of us, unfortunately, we know that we have this much money. Okay? And if we have that much money, then we have to start making decisions on what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. And so what your budget does, every single element of the budget is a reflection of the things you have made a decision to do. Okay? And if I'm reading it, really important is tell me what assumptions are there. Assumptions, for instance, in terms of donors. Assumptions in terms of the cost of providing the service. You know, the difference in cost between me having a staff member who's a full-time benefited employee versus contract labor. Greg and I were just talking about assumptions. Okay, the sequestration has taken 60% of the disaster recovery money out of the marketplace. Okay, sequestration, assumption, 2008 levels, Larry. I can't say less 8%. Okay, that's an assumption. Hey, if they restore funding after the 6 months sequestration period, woohoo! But if I budget assuming that they don't, then I'm better off. Okay, so I want to see your assumptions. Assumptions like rent, reimbursements, assumptions in terms of cost per client, or per hour, or per whatever your measure of your unit of measure is. Okay, and you can do research. You ought to know, either through parent organizations or trade organizations, kind of how you stack up against other organizations like you. If your cost of counseling is $100 an hour, and there are others who are doing it at 40, we need to know why. Likewise, if you're at 40, what am I missing? Is it I'm not paying enough, and therefore I'm not getting this good people? Have I figured out a way to be more efficient? When I mentioned that my cost of consulting is $47 an hour fully loaded, and my peers in Miami were in the 120, 130. Well, first of all, they accused me of cooking books. My peers did. Then they figured out, holy cow, he uses students. That's free labor to provide consulting. So you've got to understand what are the components driving your costs. Likewise, when I look at these funding applications we did for United Way, I want to look at apples and apples. I want to understand, why is it that it costs me $1,100 per client served for one program versus $47 for another? And so, again, it's all about how you project your costs. Most of us know that our rent is somewhat set for periods of time. I was telling Greg, my funding agency is now only funding us 1 month at a time, which really is difficult to manage because they don't understand that in Florida, you know, utilities are kind of opposite what the Northeast are. And my biggest utility bills come in June, July, and August, where they're thinking that, oh no, if he's only paying $900 a month in utilities in January, we ought to be able to do that all the way through October. We don't straight line any costs, right? So your budget ought to reflect your best guesstimate of what the costs are going to be. Likewise, in your budget, and I would encourage you to actually have itemized revenue lines for every funding source, so that we can look at, you know, one of the guilt things that I have is that I'm often, for years, we were too dependent on our federal funding, okay? And it hasn't grown. So what I needed to do, and to really bring it into my focus, and explain to my advisory board what I was doing, is I have federal funds, I have private donation funds, I don't have state funds yet, but I have. And then, so I was forced to communicate with folks, itemize my revenue sources just the way I itemize my expenses. And then what happens is, then you can compare yourself to peers. You can also say to your board, see, we need private sector funds. We need buy-in from the private sector and build a compelling fundraising argument based on our budgets. A couple of resources that are in your packet that you can go to find out about, in essence, in business I use the RMA statement studies to compare businesses against their peers in terms of percentages of expenses per dollar of revenue. These kind of organizations also collect that information, so they can tell you how you're doing against like-sized peers, normalized peers, the 100 best peers, and that, again, especially when you're starting up new programs, it's really hard to come up with this. It's all projection. So then it's really hard to come up with how are my numbers going to stack out. And so at least that gives us a thumbnail to start from. We can then customize. My budgets are planned. In other words, when I know how much money I have, I can then translate that into what kind of services will I be providing. Make decisions again on who I will and won't serve, or how I will and won't serve people. Okay? In other words, I'm going to funnel startups toward training first, because that is, number one, valuable, but two, it's a filter. Or if I'm going to impose, you can't get to a consultant unless you at least do a white paper for me. If you're not willing to do a one-page white paper on your business, I don't think I can spend resources on it. Okay. And you can buy budget templates, and you won't use all those line items, but be pretty specific, because we all need to kind of have categories and subcategories. At least have a conscious decision. Yes, we are. No, we aren't spending on that. If you like me, budgeting is not fun. It's like the thing I really hate to do most. So I usually procrastinate. But thankfully, there's usually a submission deadline that says, if you don't have it in, you don't get none. And so that's my reasonable time frame. We have self-imposed in my organization. We do our monthly financials. They're all signed off on by the 7th of every month, and it's just part of the discipline that we've had to undergo because things are tight to make sure we're on track. And we do a considerable amount in the business plan budget of variance tracking. I want to know why I'm spending over or underspending in every category, because there was a strategy behind the initial budget that I built. So then the question is, what am I doing differently, and have I veered off the plan? So this is how I stay between my navigational buoys. I tend to budget by program. Okay, there are programs that I know I'm going to overspend on, but they're essential programs for me to provide. And there are some that are much more efficient, and they become kind of the milk cow for the organization. And so, but by having snapshot programs, I can make, again, a conscious decision, do I or don't I want to offer that product? When I was in the Coca-Cola business, there were products that we sold that, frankly, we sold because they were near and dear to my dad's heart. And we had a line of soft drinks called Suburban sodas. They were, with a cream soda and orange and root beer and birch beer. And they were little returnable bottles and 32-ounce returnable bottles. And he couldn't cut the cord. He just loved it. Except we were losing our butts. And so finally, and this is really hard for the son to do to the dad, it's like, Dad, this is my inheritance. Going out the window. No, it wasn't quite that way. But this is how much money we're bleeding, and he knew it. But until he actually saw it, and saw the red ink, emphasis in red, you know, before we were using wide bar green paper on IBM 36s, okay? And some of you are going, what the heck is that? Okay, you have to remember this was way before PCs. Yes, there was time. But what it does is it causes you financially to justify as closely as possible every single program. And make a conscious decision, do we do it or do we not? There will be products that you have to do because it's the favorite of your biggest funder. It's the one. Know why you're doing it. That's all I'm saying is strategically know why you're doing it. And that's, again, the budget helps you. Budget helps you sometimes move an otherwise recalcitrant board toward a decision that you want. Okay? And so, to me, again, use it as a tool, not as a necessary evil. All right, this is the thing that nonprofits hate the most. It's measurement. Yes, ma'am.
Question about going back to the budget.
Yes.
When we typically do a budget, percentage of the board, it's your standard kind of Excel spreadsheet, and this may be a question for other people too. I don't know about everybody else, but the eyes kind of glaze over, and I get it because my mind kind of glaze over and I look at it too. But particularly when there are people who haven't ever dealt with them before, do you know of, or does anybody know of any tools that help you, whether it's presented in a bar graph or different ways to visually represent it, or a good cheat sheet for empowering people to look at all of those line items? I agree it's great language about using it as a tool, but I'm interested in how that translates to folks who don't look at it every day.
Yeah, I'm going to show you one that's really a bad example. And then, and actually, it's the handout that you received. This is actually a resource budget. Okay, and actually, and what it does is, this is a budget for my hours available and where I would like to buy each product. And then on the back side of that is how I track it. Okay, it's not my financial budget. But I would agree with you wholeheartedly that that you want to use bars and you want to use pies. Especially when you talk about revenue, pie is really effective. I'm personally not a stacked bar graph guy because I don't think that. I think of how big is the pie and how big a slice is each funding source provided. Then I put right next to it when I do my budget. What is the cost in a pie? And sometimes what you see is there are disproportionate cost of services versus revenues dedicated to services. And that's a great way of explaining, especially to laymen who are the people with the great hearts, who just don't want to know what a bottom line is. That's a great way. Likewise with your expenses. Use either a bar or, I like again, a pie to show me what percentages of our total revenues are going to what things. And is that growing or is it declining? But you're right. I think most of us don't have any interest as a board member in going line by line through the budget. I want to know net change. I want to know where we are versus projection. I want to know things like, from a governance standpoint, I need to know if we're over or under and kind of why that, I look at wildly swinging things. So if a number is 300% projection, I need to know what that is. Maybe it's time. Because, especially like I'm on the board of the Santa Rosa Chamber, and we do bonfire January. We do the beer sales at bonfire January. Well, we're cash-based financials. So if we take in $25,000 and we don't write checks until January, we look like we were great in 2012. We look like poop in 2013 because we're paying all the bills with no revenue. And so as a board member, I have to understand where's it happening. And I think that the use of color is another way. To use red when you're negative as opposed to a little bitty, Excel wants you to put a little bitty, or so does QuickBooks, minus beside it, which is often overlooked. And it doesn't fairly express, to me, it doesn't fairly express, or clearly express variances. So, I think that for most of us, at least conferring with our board and kind of those stakeholders, it's summary information they're looking for. They want pictures. You'll have probably a finance committee or a treasurer or somebody on your board that will actually have to wade into the willy-nillys. The charity that I was talking about this morning, as I waded into the financial statements, there's a possibility of saving it, but you have to get down to the line by line to figure out, because what they've never done is tie costs to the good work they do. Okay, 17 good works, but we really have never looked at what is the reimbursement rate, what is the funding rate, what is the cost of providing that service versus the good it does for the organization. And as a board member, I'm probably a little ashamed to say that I never got into that level of minutia until there was a crisis. Andrea, then Skip.
Actually, we'll be happy to send you. Tom does a really good job, and I will tell you, he does the color, the drafts and all, and from the nonprofit side, I'm so conscious of the paperwork printing that at first when I came in, I took all of this crap and I'm like, I don't need that, let's shorten it up.
And oh, by the way, you're doing it on a color printer.
But he does a graphic and a narrative, and a graph and a narrative. And that really, I think, Carol can probably tell you she didn't like any better than the rest of the board, but I took all of that pretty stuff out and the color out. But I think this format is very, very helpful in presenting the budget, so we'll be happy to share that with you guys and maybe put it on your flash drive for next time so you have a copy, because I think it's very effective because it's providing a narrative that explains those line by line that people are getting with a pretty colored chart that now is, I just leave it in there and have it on paper, so it's effective. I've got to learn that, the cost is worth it with those folks, so I will share that with you too.
Good.
I think you mentioned this, Larry, but particularly with not-for-profit boards, you're likely to have some people who don't bring that business numbers orientation to the table, and you love them because they bring other orientations to the table. But for those people, oftentimes a one-page narrative summary, income and expenses, and here's the changes, all in words, is helpful. The other thing, somebody's going to want to see the full Excel spreadsheet. That would be me.
Greg's going to break his neck nodding.
Yeah. Well, I tried to warn him before he invited me on the board, but he didn't listen. Anyway, you can also do a one-page budget summary. Actually, it could be 2 lines. Income and expenses change from prior year, or something that will be helpful for other people on the board. And finally, don't overlook the importance of the verbal explanation of the budget, because that's another learning style that some people on your board will bring to the table. They won't absorb very well anything that you put on a piece of paper or up on the slide, but if you talk to them about it, they'll figure it out.
I agree. Skip and I sit on the rebuild Northwest Florida board together, and they give us all the excruciating details, and it's so small you can't even read it. But they provide a great verbal narrative, and so the audit committee is able to get into the weeds when we need to get into the weeds. But the board, and this is probably instructive for how we construct our boards. is you need some technical folks and you need some good-hearted folks. And you need kind of everything in between. So you want to build a balance for it so that there are enough people who understand the grinding numbers, and then there are a bunch of people that say, okay, as long as we're solvent and doing good stuff. That answer? Okay. Evaluation. As I said, as nonprofits, historically, we kind of just said, you know, leave me alone, I'm doing good work. Well, how do you know? Is my thing. And, you know, social ventures, all of us have double bottom lines. Think about it. For most of us, we provide services to one group of people, but we get funding from another group of people. And so how do we manage both bottom lines responsibly? And to me, my argument would be the only way we can do it is that we set out our objectives, so to speak, and then we track against it to see how we're progressing. Track against it in real time, if you have that kind of system, at least monthly, and then compare it to the past. So what you need to do is think about how can I quantify what I do, whether it's number of animals that we have and the food cost per animal, if that's important to you. In my case, I have a resource which is consulting hours. And what I have to do is I have to develop, and that's what that loose sheet was, I have to develop a budget of how I'm going to apply those hours. And then I track daily to see where we are against plan. And so to the degree that you can quantify it and then have a system in place, I don't care if it's a piece of accounting paper, 6 column, that you're tracking it, ticking it, and watching it so that we can evaluate. And what happens there is then this becomes a decision-making tool for you. So if you look at this, you'll see that I have a total goal of 2,806 consulting hours this year. And I've broken it down by segment as to how I'm going to allocate. I have last year's budget, I have this year's budget, I have next year's budget, so it's kind of a planning document. What happened last year was that we had budgeted a certain amount for startups and pre-ventures. And I do my budgeting next month for 2014. Well, so I put together the budget, and then all of a sudden, Quint Studer decides to do the Pensacola Business Challenge, which by definition was 112 startup ventures. And he thrust that upon us and said, Larry, you're going to do it. You don't say no to Quint Studer. So we said, of course we'll do it. Well, that allowed me to I had to change fast, because I blew my budget for the entire year of startup assistance in January and February. And, but I knew that. And I was able to track that. And I was able to kind of re-budget and allocate hours. Okay? The other thing that we're responsible for tracking is what are the outcomes? How many people get loans? How many people start businesses? How many jobs are created? How many jobs are retained? How many government contracts are obtained? This is my client base. We project that out based on these activities that we've said are critical for these segments. This is the impact we can expect. Now I can track that. When we went to change this strategy, my biggest fear was that by minimizing or reducing the amount of assistance we gave to startups and new ventures, historically, those have been my greatest impact providers. So I was taking a leap of faith when we were persuaded that, no, you know what, if you can hook on to the micro businesses and the SMEs, that the potential for generating impact is greater. That's letting go of something that I hold, a sure thing. I could always tell you what I was going to get from my startups. I can always tell you and I can tell you what I'm going to get if I have a hurricane. Because we're going to fire up the revolving loan funds, we're going to fire up the bridge loans. I know what the impact is going to be. And now I'm venturing into new segments where I'm providing new services, much more depth, much closer, longer engagements, and trying to project outcomes. So if in fact it hadn't panned out, we would have been able to pivot and go back to our old strategy, but do it with an informed basis because we're tracking our key performance indicators. All right, so part and parcel of having the ability to evaluate and track is you've got to have clear goals, okay, and then clear objectives. And so if you think of a goal as your broad-based ambition, kind of the resulting change that's going to happen, okay, I'm not going to measure goal, so to speak. It's kind of a broader outcome. And it may not even be achievable in the near term, your goal. Okay. So, sample goal. Improve the overall strength and survivability of businesses in the region. That's a goal. We already know that, remember I said the need, when we developed our need statement, was 80% of all small businesses fail in the first 5 years, and 80% of the remainder fail in the next 5. So this says one of the goals that came right out of that need statement was we want to improve survivability. We want to strengthen their competitiveness. We want to grow quality and employment. All of this falling out of need. Okay. Objectives are a little different. They are specific. They're measurable. They are achievable. Okay, sometimes that's a tough one because our funding agencies want to impose deliverables on us that are not achievable, and we compromise our good judgment because they're writing checks. They're realistic and they're time bound. In other words, we're going to do it by a certain time, right? And so, if you think about objective, it's narrowly defined. It is it's tied right out of that need statement. In other words, your goal should lead you to objectives under the goal. Mission, need, goal, objective. So, my specific organization. My objective is provide 2,806 hours of consulting to at least 560 clients. That translates, I forget, 5 hours a client, or something like that. Conduct 100 entrepreneurial training events, very measurable. I know I can do it and I need 2,000 attendees. Okay, both measurable. I know it's in 2013, it's time. Conduct a minimum of 50 public outreach activities. I'm checking one off today. I'm marketing to you whether you know it or not, whether you care or not. But you now know a lot more about what I do. Okay? So those are objectives, and I can measure. I can think about those things. This form again, those are really my objectives. Okay? And this is my way of measuring, telling me how I did it versus the past. So, mission, needs, objectives. And that's kind of how, when I'm writing my business plan, that's kind of how I want to do it. I become more and more and more specific until it's my instruction manual. It says, this is how we're going to march forward. We're going to lead with our left foot, and we're going to go 20 steps, and we're going to hang a right. And that's essentially how the business plan should take us through. Now, that becomes easy, because then it doesn't require you or I to survive the organization. You know, and even a board member, he said, could follow those instructions.
Can I ask a question now? It seemed like those objectives were very production-oriented, if you will,
Right.
not effects-oriented.
Correct.
In other words, your need statement said that all these businesses fail. Your objective was very production. How many people do I get through my door? Do you have a second set that are sort of long-term? Did I meet those needs?
Yes. Other objectives include cost of consulting hour, the level of customer satisfaction. In fact, one of my objectives is we do an annual survey, and one of my objectives is to reach at least 30% response rate, which, if any of you have done surveys, that's virtually impossible. You become a stalker. And so client satisfaction, the objectives too are there are kind of the leading indicator for us is the hours we apply in each specific area. The lagging indicator that we track is the financing, the jobs created, and the contracts obtained, the business starts. And so those are all objectives too. We call it, in the federal language, we goal those things, even though it's an objective, they're very specific. And so, yes, those are kind of the surrogates that we use from the client impact side. But because we control the inputs, we don't always control the output. You could go to the bank and make a loan application, and the bank say, yes, we'll be happy to lend you that money at 8.99%, or at 13.99%. At 13.99%, you say, thank you so much for the approval, I'm gone, right? So I did everything right, helping you do that application, but I don't control the outcome. So we make as our objectives things that we can control.
Can you address that a little more clearly, Larry? Because I see this regularly, and this is one of the things that, in stepping in and looking at business plans, strategic planning, I think because we're a nonprofit, we're going to say the following. Sometimes we set our objective as things that we truly can't accomplish. And I think the business plan is your practical plan. These are things you can do. In fact, we can all want to save the world. We can want to have a 100% graduation rate. But can we, as United Way, truly do that? Now, we can make it part of our objective to match volunteers and mentors. And that can be in hours of mentors. We can't necessarily control the graduation rate.
Right, but if I'm a funder and I'm saying, well, gee, they're doing all this stuff, they've got a lot of activity, but I can't see a result. So, when I go in to try to get somebody to donate, they say, well, that's great that you're teaching children about the world. How does that help our future workforce? Well, I can't tell that, right?
And you may not ever be able to tell that piece of it. You have to do things like Larry's talking about, talk about satisfaction rate. Talk about how many more kids that you have that can now speak second language. Talk about, use the national studies Larry talked about, where you get the national statistics on how many kids who've been in speak a second language make this much more money. If you're trying to look at broader terms, you may not be able to control that output. Somebody nationally may have figures that relate to some of the stuff you're doing, but this needs to be practical. And it needs to be stuff we can truly do. And I think a lot of times because we want to save the world, we do that, and then our funders become very confused. Because we're telling them we're going to have this impact, and we don't really control it.
Well, and the time horizon is often different. I mean, I was involved slightly in the startup of the Boys and Girls Club in Milton. And part of the compelling story was if we can have them at 5 or 6 or 7 years old and after-school programs, that when they're 18, 19, 20 years old, these are the projected outcomes. And so that's a hard one to sell. It's kind of a trust me. But at the same time, Boys and Girls Club has been around so long that the studies are well documented. And so to the degree that we can do things that measure, that we can quantify, that we can compare to a national, maybe it's not a direct comparison. I think that the big part is that, to me, is that we create objectives around the resources we control. We make strategic decisions about where we're going to put our resources for the outcomes that we expect. JA does a great job of telling you, for instance, if you went through JA, this is the greater percentage of graduation, the greater percentage of honor roll students, the greater percentage of this, that, and the other. They don't control what those kids do, but they control the inputs. And they know that if they put an hour of volunteer time in a classroom, that in general that's going to produce an output. And you'll notice most of my outputs are not within my grasp. I can do the best job of showing you how to start a business, and if you don't pull the trigger, you don't create any employment. Just because, and this happens a lot, people will get involved in their business plan, and they'll get tired of it. And it'll be a burden. And then they say to themselves, holy crap, if I can't even get through the business plan, do I want to live and breathe this business 24/7? Nah, I think I'll stay employed. And so that's, you know, I did everything right, but they didn't want the enterprise to be. So we goal things, we put objectives and things we control. And then the outputs are what we expect to happen. Again, I measure them so that I can adjust that way. And we actually have national studies that show how many hours of consulting or how many dollars worth of consulting should generate a job, should generate $100,000 in finance, and that kind of thing. So again, the objectives are the things that you as a manager, you as a program can control. Is that? Okay. Essentially, having that key, the KPI, or key performance indicators, that's the backside of that sheet they handed here, allows you to measure, you know, are we having the impact we expect? Or, you know, and again, that becomes one of those things where I look at it and I say, geez, I'm putting all this information and emphasis on business planning, and I'm not getting finance as a result. Maybe what we ought to do is reapply some of those hours and put more emphasis on strategic planning or on marketing, and we're putting a lot of money into marketing and advertising assistance, but I'm not seeing any sales increases. So maybe that's better spent in business planning for my customer segments. Okay, so what we're doing is we're making, by watching those key performance indicators, and I wouldn't create 50 of them. I'd create 15 or 5, whatever's important to your enterprise. Then you can monitor in real time. Maybe it's on a case-by-case basis. Literally, as we close a case, or as we adopt out a pet, what did we expect and what was the outcome? Okay, so then we're making, again, decisions on the fly, decisions in real time. And when you're creating those objectives, keep in mind, how am I going to measure that? How am I going to evaluate that? Okay, so this is the crux. This is the summary slide of kind of everything that we discussed, starting with the mission statement and the needs statement that comes out of that, to developing our goals, our objectives, our methods, which I really didn't touch on, are the how we do it, the activities that go into reaching our objectives. And those things, of course, are driven by budget. They're driven by our human resource access, our volunteer resource access, okay? And we keep all those things going in concert by constantly evaluating our choices. Okay? And don't be afraid. I mean, over time, things go out of phase, go out of popularity, go out of usefulness. But if you're like me, there's never been a time when I didn't have enough to do. So we have to pick our fights, or pick our battles, or pick our wins. So with that, I think that's it. Any questions? Feel free to anything. There's a lot, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was one thing on using contract versus employee, and I know there are labor laws that you got to be careful. What is a contract versus employees? How do you differentiate?
Well, okay. First of all, I hide behind the state. The state policy allows us to hire people that we call other personnel services. Okay? They are theoretically an at-will employee, but they are an employee all the same. Okay, and so OPS employees versus staff, which is kind of our two designations. In practical application, if you hire a contract employee, 1099 employee, they're not a 1099 employee if you tell them where to be, when to be there, and what to do while they're there. If that makes any sense. And so if there's and it's a tough one because there's some subjectivity to it. I mean, there's some very specifics. Carol can speak to this, but if, I'll give you an example. My son is a 1099 employee for Ping Golf. Okay, they supply him with 14 bags of golf balls, and they tell him, here is your schedule for the golf courses that we're going to do demo days in. It's his job to set it up, to talk to people, to do the fittings. They don't prescribe any of that. And so he's got almost absolute freedom in the context of a demo day to, he even negotiates with the course when he's going to be there, his position on the driving range. So they don't direct how he does his work. And that's generally, Carol, is that close, the litmus test?
That's really close to that. It's the line there is that once you start directing the work, then they can become employees. That's a lot.
And people get in trouble.
Yes, they do. We, at Working Federal, I'm responsible for human resources, big area. And we actually have right now about 400 employees on campus who are Aerotech tips. Aerotech tips, and we have all of our federal employees. So we do the Orange area, and we've had some really, some challenges trying to keep that separated and make sure, because we never really hire that in contractors, which is less hiring their employees. But in this case, we need to look at the mortgage rates, not the employees we have. We really have to be careful about making sure we don't keep them as employees.
So, if you, here's a, I think Andrew said I would do this.
Like the words we mapped there.
We've got a couple of things. One is that there's a document that's not on your jump drive now that will be, and basically it's like 20, 25 questions that if you start writing the answers to them for your organization, you'll be way ahead of the business. You'll have a copy of my business plan without the salary information, and kind of how we do resource allocation. And it's narrative, and it describes how we're going to market, it describes our marketplace, not all the demographics. And then if you want, I'll make this offer, if you want to come in and have us go through the plan, I'm happy to do that. And we can make some resources available for that. Working with nonprofits is a newly carved out portion of our federal mandate. Not mandate. It used to be we were not allowed to work with nonprofits. It's a tough education of legislators. They say, oh, nonprofits don't pay taxes. Well, no, they pay employees who pay taxes. And our argument has always been nonprofits need more, to be more business-like, to be more efficient and productive. And the only way to do that is to consult with them. So we can on a limited basis work with nonprofits, about 10% of what I do. So you can contact us, either myself or one of my staff members will be happy to work with you.